They were the original Men in Black, the personification of the Nazi state. In their somber uniforms adorned with swastikas and death's heads, the members of the Schutzstaffel or SS cast threatening shadows over Germany in the 1930s, and they grew in power during the war. Offering the Führer loyalty to the death, SS members were totally committed to National Socialism long after it became obvious that the Nazis were pulling Germany down into ruin. Even today, they have a curiously compelling image. Hitler's bodyguard, the infamous SS. Black-clad Aryan supermen, armed with the latest weapons that Germany's ingenious scientists and engineers could devise. Cruel, merciless soldiers of the Nazi state, given to nameless atrocities and to slaughtering prisoners out of hand. Like many commonly held notions, this picture of the SS does not tell the whole story. The SS did wear black, but only in the pre-war years. SS men were responsible for some of the worst atrocities of the war, but they were also Germany's toughest soldiers. The shape and form of the SS owed much to Adolf Hitler. It was he who formed the specially selected bodyguard units which would evolve into the SS. It was Hitler who gave them their sense of being chosen men. It was Hitler who selected men who took pride in doing anything he asked, whether it was legal or not. But although Hitler gave birth to the SS, Heinrich Himmler provided the executive ability and gave it the structure that enabled it to grow. Himmler became deputy leader of the SS in 1927, rising to be Reichsführer in January 1929. Almost immediately, he started molding the organization into a totally different shape from that envisaged by the Führer. The new Reichsführer had two main aims. First, he wanted to use the SS to protect the party. To this end, he established a small intelligence section, which under Reinhard Heydrich was to become the feared Sicherheitsdienst, or SD. SS units from all over Germany were expected to forward reports on political opponents, as well as on groups such as Freemasons and Jews. Second, Himmler saw in the SS a sworn community of superior men. They were to become the purifiers of the German race, a gene pool from which the perfect Aryan could be produced. He tightened entry procedures considerably, providing strict health and fitness standards which new recruits had to meet. Indeed, he examined photos of applicants personally for any signs of Mongoloid, Negroid, or Semitic features. By the time Hitler came to power, the SS had grown to be 25,000 strong, though this was a drop in the ocean compared to the millions of Sturmabteilung members. From the first, the SS had differentiated itself from the stormtroopers by wearing black caps and its own insignia. However, when Himmler was appointed its commander, those changes became more profound. Above all, it was the adoption of the all-black uniform with silver trim that made the SS stand out even more from the brown-shirted masses of the SA. To this ready visibility were added fiercely high selection standards and strict training, emphasizing loyalty to the Führer above all else. Himmler's intelligence-gathering operation collected information from potential opposition within the party, as well as from political opponents, and their brown-shirted colleagues saw them as toading informers. At this point, Himmler seemed to accept his subservient position within the party's mass movement, though the groundwork was already being laid for the establishment of an SS state. The true growth of the SS began after Hitler seized power in 1933. Himmler was appointed police chief in Bavaria, a position that he used as a platform to bring all German law enforcement agencies, both uniformed and plainclothed, under SS control. The power of the SS was consolidated in June 1934, when Hitler used the black shirts to destroy the leadership of the rival SA in the Night of the Long Knives. After 1933, the SS grew rapidly. In the process, it split into three main groups: the Armed SS, the Death's Head Guards, and the Allgemeine SS. The Allgemeine, or General SS, initially took control of the police and security forces. It was also responsible for administering the rapidly growing SS economic empire and took a leading role in investigating and promoting Himmler's racial theories. The Allgemeine SS retained the characteristic black uniform long after other SS branches had switched to grey. Himmler sought to increase his power by offering honorary membership in the Allgemeine SS to people of influence. By attracting prominent industrialists, academics, landowners, and former military officers, Himmler allayed some of the population's fear of the Nazis. In the early days at least, the disciplined Schutzstaffel was seen as being more acceptable than other Nazi groups. The Armed SS came into existence at the same time as the Schutzstaffel was gaining friends and influence. It originated in Hitler's strong-arm squads of the late 1920s. Hitler's bodyguard, the Leibstandarte, was the first unit of what would become the Waffen SS. Both Hitler and Himmler, neither of whom trusted the German generals, saw it as a military force, personally loyal to the Führer, which he could use as a counterweight to the army. The third and most sinister SS group was the Totenkopfverbände, the Death's Head Guards. These brutal units were created in 1933 after the SS won a turf fight with the SA over who should be in control of the concentration camps. The first camps were being built almost as soon as the Nazis came to power, and it was at Dachau the Totenkopf Guards evolved many of the systems and techniques by which the SS terrorized Europe. They were very different from the ferociously disciplined members of the Armed SS. Tasked with guarding and running Nazi concentration camps, the Totenkopfverbände took pride in their total lack of military virtues. The Guards took their cue from one of their early commanders. Theodor Eicke, a psychopathic killer even before being recruited by Himmler, had been a failure as a soldier and a policeman. In his Death's Head Guards, recruited from unemployed malcontents, embittered farmhands, and simple thugs, Eicke found willing pupils for his brand of brutality. Control of the camps gave Himmler access to a large pool of slave labor, which proved useful in the growth of SS industrial power. Himmler wanted the SS to be economically independent, and from the start he encouraged SS business. SS control of the camps meant that it was primarily responsible for the implementation of the final solution, a task it performed with gusto. In the crackpot racial theories that permeated the upper reaches of the SS, the genocidal murder of millions of Jews was seen simply as a necessary means of purifying the Aryan race. The Armed SS was the largest branch of the organization. It would eventually number some 39 divisions, and 1 million men of 15 nationalities passed through its ranks. Renamed Waffen-SS in the spring of 1940, it took part in 12 major campaigns and was noted for its tough fighting qualities and aggressive leadership. The premier formation of the Waffen-SS, the Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, provided guards of honor for visiting VIPs before the war. Initially, the Armed SS was made up from Hitler's bodyguard, the Leibstandarte, together with a number of politische Bereitschaften, or political emergency squads. These have been established in the 1930s as strong-arm units designed to use violent measures against political opponents. Members of the armed SS were originally designated as SS Verfügungstruppe, or Special Duty Troops. The name was usually shortened to SSVT. The first armed SS Guard unit was the SS Stabswache Berlin, later renamed the Wachtbataillon Berlin. This became the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, or SS Bodyguard Regiment Adolf Hitler, in September 1933. 2 months later, on the 10th anniversary of the Munich Putsch, the Leibstandarte took an oath of personal allegiance to Adolf Hitler. In its short but violent existence between March 1933 and May 1945, the Leibstandarte grew from a bodyguard of 120 men protecting the Führer to an outsized armored division more than 20,000 strong, equipped with the most modern weapons the German industry could produce. The man who did most to shape the character of Leibstandarte was its first commanding officer, Joseph Sepp Dietrich. In German, Dietrich is slang for a skeleton key, so to honor their commander, the division adopted a shield with a key as its insignia. Sepp Dietrich was born in Bavaria in 1892. A veteran of World War I, he joined the SA in 1923, just in time to take part in the Munich Putsch, for which he was dismissed from the police. After drifting from job to job, he became a full member of the Nazi Party in 1928. For a time he was Hitler's driver, which earned him the nickname Chauffeuresker from his patron. Dietrich joined the expanding SS in 1930. In March 1933, he was given command of the SS Stabswache Berlin, which became the Leibstandarte. Hitler once described Dietrich as being a mixture of cunning, ruthlessness, and hardness, a word much used in National Socialist propaganda. He was certainly very tough and instilled a unique fighting spirit into the armed SS. He was popular with the men he commanded because he cared for their welfare. However, he was not as highly regarded by the professional army officers with whom he served as the SS expanded. In its early days, the main purpose of the Leibstandarte was ceremonial, standing like black statues outside the main buildings in Berlin, or executing crisp drill movements as honor guards for visiting VIPs. But its capacity for violent action was never far from the surface. When it was decided to set up a private Nazi army, the Leibstandarte provided the core of the new armed SS. In December 1934, it was expanded to regimental size and began to move away from its political bodyguard function to a more conventional military role. It participated in the bloodless occupation of the Rhineland in March 1936, and a motorized battalion under Sepp Dietrich took part in the invasion of Austria in March 1938. By the time of the Anschluss, the armed SS had grown dramatically. In addition to the 2,600 men of the Leibstandarte, there were 3 SSVT Standarten, or regiments, derived from the Politische Bereitschaften. The 3 regiments were given the names Deutschland, Germania, and Der Führer, and were trained and equipped as motorized infantry. Although noted for their fighting spirit, SS men were ideological warriors above all else. Their motto was, "Mein Ehre heißt Treue." Mein honor is loyalty. That loyalty was beyond question, and the prime recipient of their absolute belief was the man to whom they swore a personal oath of allegiance, Adolf Hitler. Ideology played a major part in SS training. Each man had to attend several lectures every week, during which they were indoctrinated into the SS creed. Central to that creed was the idea that the SS was a brotherhood dedicated to creating a new Aryan world, the vanguard of the master race whose destiny it was to rule that world. They were also exposed to Heinrich Himmler's pseudo-Teutonic mythology, but there is some evidence to suggest that few of the fighting SS actually paid more than lip service to the Reichsfuhrer's fantasies. They were trained to be hard, though often that hardness was accompanied by a willingness to commit atrocities. Even so, their belief in the cause meant that Waffen SS units generally fought with suicidal courage and with a disdain for death. Before the war, the SS was an exclusively volunteer force, and its physical entry standards were high, though the educational standards of the average SS man were surprisingly low. The Leibstandarte was especially particular. Dietrich wanted men, not boys, and would not accept anybody younger than 23 years of age. The minimum height was 180 centimeters, 5 feet 11 inches, and recruits had to be in perfect health. A single tooth filling was grounds for rejection. The prospective Leibstandarte member also had to prove his Aryan heritage. Training was along regular army lines, though the SS emphasized fitness even more than the Wehrmacht, and sports played a greater part in the SS man's life. Aggression was highly prized, and exercises emphasized speed and ferocity of attack. In addition to the normal SS training, the Leibstandarte also had to master ceremonial drill, so much so that other units gave them the nickname Asphalt Warriors. Although the Leibstandarte remained separate, the three other Standarten would become the nucleus of the SS-VT division, which saw action in Poland and France. In 1940, the division was renamed Das Reich. When war came, the bullies and murderers of the Totenkopfverbande provided the core of another SS formation, the Totenkopf Division, commanded by Theodor Eicke. A fourth unit was recruited from the uniformed police, but the SS Polizei Division was only partly motorized and was poorly equipped. When war broke out in September 1939, the Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler was organized as a motorized infantry regiment. In day-to-day usage, the full title was usually contracted to LSSAH or LAH. During the invasion of Poland, it was part of General von Reichenau's 10th Army, but it won reluctant approval from the army for its fighting ability. By this time, the armed or Waffen-SS was wearing field grey uniform like the army. However, unlike army units, its soldiers were also equipped with a range of well-designed camouflage smocks and helmet covers, which were later to become complete camouflaged uniforms. When the war expanded westwards, LAH linked up with German paratroopers in the Dutch city of Rotterdam. After Holland, it was deployed to France and was one of the regiments that drove across northern France to the sea at Boulogne. The SS-VT and Totenkopf divisions were also involved in the French campaign. The inexperienced Totenkopf men did not perform well. They were badly shaken by a British counterattack at Cambrai, and stiff resistance by 100 men of the Royal Norfolk Regiment was rewarded by the first of many massacres of prisoners to be perpetrated by the SS. There was another massacre by the Leibstandarte at Bethune soon afterwards. After Dunkirk, the three SS units were attached to Panzergruppe Kleist and played a major part in the advance into France. Although they fought hard, the Totenkopf was guilty of more massacres, especially of French colonial troops who were regarded as racially inferior. The LAH was expanded to brigade strength in August 1940. It was at this time that its members were told by their Führer, "It will be an honor for you who bear my name to lead every German attack." SS Division Viking was based on units detached from Das Reich, but the bulk of its troops were to be recruited from Germanic and Nordic volunteers. This was a sop to the army, who had been complaining about the SS poaching the best German recruits. In the spring of 1941, the LAH were transferred from their barracks in Berlin to Sofia, the capital of Bulgaria, which was then a German ally. On the 6th of April 1941, it crossed the border as one of the lead elements in the invasion of southern Yugoslavia. Via Albania, it pushed on into Greece. Moving down the west coast, LAH commandeered 2 Greek fishing boats and organized a ferry across the Gulf of Corinth. LAH swung east, linking up with the paratroopers of the 2nd Fallschirmjäger Regiment, who had secured the Corinth Canal. During the Greek campaign, the Leibstandarte won a reputation for being hard but fair, a reputation which was to change dramatically on the Eastern Front. Following a victory parade in Athens, the unit returned to barracks in Czechoslovakia. By the opening of Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the Leibstandarte was a division in name but not in strength. Assigned to von Rundstedt's Army Group South, along with the Viking Division, it fought non-stop from the Polish border to Kherson near the Black Sea, and then along the Sea of Azov to capture Rostov on the Don. Third Reich was assigned to Army Group Center, forming part of the reserve of Guderian's 2nd Panzer Group. It played a part in the great encirclement battles around Kiev before becoming one of the spearhead formations in the drive on Moscow. Totenkopf and Polizei divisions were part of Army Group North. Both were heavily involved in the advance through the Baltic states and in the fierce fighting around Leningrad, and both suffered large numbers of casualties. The SS divisions were in the thick of the fighting when the Soviets struck back. The winter counter-offensive pushed LAH out of Rostov and back over the river Meuse, all but destroying the division in the process. Third Reich was severely mauled in front of Moscow, and Totenkopf was decimated while breaking out of the Demyansk pocket. Eventually, all but Viking were sent to France to recuperate and refit. Viking remained at the front, participating in the summer offensive towards the Caucasus. Their performance in the fierce fighting on the Eastern Front won the Waffen SS considerable respect from the army for its combat ability. But the hardness of its men was also reflected in the increasing number of atrocities they committed. Vengeance was a major motive. Over 3 days in April 1942, the Leibstandarte killed 4,000 Soviet prisoners of war in retaliation for the murder of 6 of their own. 2 SS mountain divisions and a cavalry division were created in 1942. The 6th SS Mountain Division Nord was formed in Norway and fought with the Finns on the Arctic front. The 7th SS Mountain Division, Prince Eugen, was formed for partisan operations in the Balkans. The 8th SS Cavalry Division, Florian Geyer, was also used on anti-partisan operations and quickly gained an unsavory reputation. In January 1942, there were probably no more than 30,000 partisans active across 850,000 square miles of territory. A year later, things had changed dramatically. Their activities were directed by a central command in Moscow. Supplies were being delivered regularly by aircraft, and the number of active fighters had swollen to more than 130,000. On German pilot maps, large swathes of Belarusia were marked in red, dangerous to land. The credit for this startling rise in guerrilla activity goes to the Germans themselves. German army retaliation for resistance activities was deliberately out of proportion to the trouble they caused. For example, in November 1941, a security detachment reported shooting 400 villagers after guerrillas damaged a communications facility. The army and the SS burned down villages in the depth of the Russian winter and drove women and children into the snow to die. In the summer of 1942, the increase in partisan activity prompted further German reaction. From August, the SS officially dropped the term partisan in its communications, using bandit instead. In October, Himmler appointed SS Obergruppenführer Erich von Lembach-Zalewski to coordinate the anti-partisan war in Russia. Nevertheless, The fearful attrition suffered by the German army on the battlefront severely restricted its options. By December 1942, OKW ordered all means to be used, even against women and children. At the end of 1942, the Wehrmacht had ground to a halt. The Sixth Army was bogged down in Stalingrad, and the Red Army had gone over to the offensive in the central sector. By now, the main SS fighting divisions had been brought up to strength and were equipped with panzers. Leibstandarte, Das Reich and Totenkopf were sent back to Russia as the 1st SS Panzer Corps. In February 1943, after the fall of Stalingrad, the SS played a critical part in the Battle of Kharkov. Following the battle, Germany's last major victory on the Eastern Front, Joseph Goebbels recorded in his diary that Hitler was exceptionally happy about the way the Leibstandarte was led by Sepp Dietrich. This man has personally performed real feats of heroism. The success of his troops in Russia prompted Himmler to expand the Waffen SS dramatically. 4 new armored divisions were authorized. The 9th Hohenstaufen, 10th Frundsberg, 11th Nordland, and 12th Hitlerjugend. All began forming in 1943, but none was ready to take part in the summer offensive that year. That offensive was to take place at Kursk. Operation Citadel was an attempt to eliminate a major salient in the front line, centered on the city of Kursk. Obergruppenführer Paul Hausser's 2nd SS Panzer Corps formed part of the southern pincer in what became the biggest tank battle in history. The SS fought with their customary fervor, penetrating further into the Soviet lines than their flanking army units. Leibstandarte alone knocked out about 500 Soviet tanks in the intense fighting. But the Red Army was too well prepared, and for the first time a German summer offensive was stopped in its tracks. The Germans were forced to withdraw, and the Soviets moved into the attack. In a non-stop rolling summer and winter offensive, the Russians forced the Wehrmacht back. Most of the SS divisions mounted effective fighting retreats, although the Leibstandarte had been hurriedly transferred to Italy following the Allied invasions there. It was transferred back to the east in November, just in time to help in the relief of the Cherkasy pocket. The Soviet advance had trapped 50,000 Germans, including men of the Waffen SS divisions Das Reich and Viking. About 35,000 survivors were able to break out and link up with advance guards of the Leibstandarte. In the spring of 1944, the SS Panzer Corps was a shadow of the powerful force that had led Operation Citadel. Most of its units were withdrawn to Western Europe to rest and refit, becoming fully fledged panzer divisions in the process. However, the 9th and 10th divisions had now completed their training and went into action at Tarnopol in April 1944. By now, the SS could no longer sustain itself on volunteers alone, and conscripts manned the 2 divisions. By accepting conscripts, the SS solved at least part of its manpower problem. Another solution came by looking outside Germany's borders for troops. Many Western volunteers served with the Army and the SS, some in large enough numbers to field divisional-sized formations. Himmler, limited by the Army on the number of men he could recruit from the German population, looked to the Nordic countries of occupied Europe to make up the difference. There were also tens of thousands of volunteers from non-Nordic countries. Young men from countries like France and Spain joined the fight out of conviction, right-wing idealists who wanted to halt the seemingly inexorable advance of Marxism. Later, as manpower demands grew apace with Himmler's ambitions, SS racial standards were relaxed. Units were formed from Muslims, Slavs, Indians, and other Asiatics. Eastern Europeans were initially used in secondary roles, serving in police battalions or as prison camp guards, working as laborers or moving supplies on the long lines of communication. But gradually, as the pressure on German manpower increased, they were used more and more often as combat troops. In 1944, a report to the Reichsfuhrer recorded that there were more than 800,000 former Soviet citizens serving with the Wehrmacht and the Waffen SS, with a further 100,000 in Luftwaffe or Kriegsmarine uniform. Many of these men were not so much fighting for the Germans as fighting against Stalin, while others chose the German flag as a more attractive alternative to the brutality of a prison camp. Some of the auxiliary units, particularly those employed by the Einsatzgruppen and as camp and ghetto guards, were among the worst perpetrators of war crimes. Between 1943 and 1945, over 27 SS divisions were formed from foreign volunteers. Some were full-size divisions, others were little more than brigades, while a few, late in the war, existed in name only. Parts of this SS Foreign Legion fought extremely well. The last and most ferocious defenders of Berlin were surviving French volunteers of the 33rd SS Division Charlemagne. In the summer of 1944, there were 4 SS divisions in the west. Leibstandarte was based near Bruges in Belgium, with the newly formed Hitler-Jugend Division in Normandy. A second new unit, the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division Goetz von Berlichingen, was working up to full strength around Tours. Das Reich was refitting in the south of France. Following the D-Day landings in Normandy, Hitler-Jugend was in action against the British almost immediately. Goetz von Berlichingen was in action against the Americans within a week, and both Das Reich and Leibstandarte were ordered to the front. Further SS reinforcements in the shape of the Hohenstaufen and Frundsberg divisions were sent from Russia and arrived in Normandy at the end of June. All the SS units fought ferociously, but ultimately in vain. They inflicted heavy casualties on their Allied opponents, but suffered crippling casualties in return. The losses were caused by Allied fighter and ground attack aircraft, naval gunfire, and continuous action against overwhelming British, Canadian, and American forces. By the close of the Battle of Normandy, the SS divisions had been virtually wiped out. Leibstandarte had been reduced to less than 30 serviceable vehicles and no tanks. Hohenstaufen had 25 tanks. Das Reich had only 15 tanks and 450 unwounded troops. Frundsberg had no vehicles or artillery, and Hitler-Jugend had only 300 men and 10 tanks. Most of the divisions were pulled back to Germany to rest and rebuild. Hohenstaufen and Frundsberg were sent to Holland, to a quiet backwater well behind the lines. It was thought that they would be relatively undisturbed at Arnhem. The presence of these 2 battle-hardened units was decisive in defeating Montgomery's drive on the Rhine, which took place in September 1944. British paratroops landed at Arnhem and immediately found themselves in combat with the tough Panzergrenadiers of the Hohenstaufen Division. The Frundsberg Division was formed into a battle group which was sent south towards Nijmegen. This blocked the Allied ground advance, which was supposed to link up with the paratroopers. The lightly armed British paratroopers fought hard, impressing the tough SS men in the process. But more German reinforcements arrived, including tank units equipped with massive King Tigers, and the British had to withdraw or surrender. For now, the borders of the Reich were safe. Between the 16th of December 1944 and the 1st of January 1945, the SS played a key part in Operation Autumn Fog, the Ardennes offensive against the US Army. By now, the Waffen SS had grown to nearly 1 million men, enough to provide an entire armored army for the campaign. Commanded by Sepp Dietrich, The 6th Panzer Army included the 1st SS Panzer Corps, comprising the Leibstandarte and Hitler-Jugend divisions, and the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, made up from the Third Reich and Hohenstaufen divisions. Spearheading the attack was an LAH Kampfgruppe, or battle group, commanded by SS Obersturmbannführer Johann Peiper. The 5,000 men of Kampfgruppe Peiper pushed forward nearly 60 kilometers. It was during this thrust that the Leibstandarte was held responsible for the murder of 71 American prisoners of war at the Malmedy crossroads. Allied numbers and superior air power halted and finally broke the German attack. The remnants of the SS units were withdrawn across the Rhine to refit. The Ardennes offensive had cost the Germans nearly 100,000 dead. In January 1945, the Russians opened their winter offensive into Hungary. Several SS volunteer divisions were committed to the defense of Budapest, and SS panzer divisions Totenkopf and Viking were transferred south from the Warsaw area to protect the Hungarian oil fields. Attempts to relieve Budapest failed, and the Florian Geyer and Maria Theresa divisions were annihilated. Hitler ordered the transfer of the 6th SS Panzer Army to Hungary. Although still weak after the losses suffered in the Ardennes, 4 elite SS divisions were still a potent fighting force. However, once the Russians learned that a Waffen SS army was in the region, they sent in major reinforcements of their own. On the 6th of March 1945, the SS launched Operation Spring Awakening. After a fruitless attempt to recapture the Hungarian oil fields, the SS troops were hit by a major Soviet counterattack. The Germans withdrew into Austria, but were ordered to hold Vienna. When Hitler heard of the withdrawals, he flew into a rage. Remote from the battlefield in his bunker in Berlin, he ordered that the men of SS divisions Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, Third Reich, Totenkopf and Hohenstaufen should remove their cuff titles, and that all promotions and decorations authorized on Hitler's birthday on the 20th of April were to be cancelled. Sepp Dietrich's reaction was typical and robust. When the commander of the 6th SS Panzer Army received the signal, he remarked, "There's your reward for all you've done these past 5 years." After considering putting all the honors into a chamber pot and sending them to Hitler, he simply ignored the order. Following the news of Hitler's death, Dietrich ensured that most of the Waffen SS divisions in the east were able to break contact with the advancing Russians and surrender to the Americans at Ster in Upper Austria. The Waffen SS moved a long way in 25 years. Hitler's personal thugs became the parade soldiers of the 1930s, who in turn evolved into the well-equipped million-strong army of 1944. They remained the most motivated of German troops, and their fighting abilities saw them being used as elite spearhead forces from Kursk and Kharkov to the Battle of the Bulge. The Waffen SS influenced the course of World War II out of all proportion to their numbers. But their ruthless fanaticism led them to commit many atrocities. They might have considered themselves the elite of the German armed forces, but they faced years of captivity in prisoner of war cages after the SS was declared an illegal organization at Nuremberg. To the victorious Allies, there was no difference between the Waffen SS and the mass murderers of Auschwitz.